Welcome to the BIP Ventures Extraordinary Pursuits podcast, a fascinating and inspiring journey into the world of venture capital and startups. Each episode offers masterclasses and entrepreneurial stories from some of the top minds in the innovation economy. Get ready to unlock new ideas and gain valuable advice for how to thrive as an innovator and an investor. In this episode of Extraordinary Pursuits, Christy Johnson speaks with John O'Brien, the founder, CEO, and managing partner of Sales Talent Group, a nationwide executive search firm that specializes in delivering exceptional sales talent. John is a seasoned executive sales search expert who has made outside and inside sales placements at all leadership levels for companies across the U.S. Since 1998, Sales Talent Group has placed thousands of sales professionals. They have earned an unprecedented 93% 12-month retention rate. The industry benchmark is 40%. Let's get started.
So, John, you have been in the BIP family for years, not only as an investor, but you've also placed a number of our sales leaders in our portfolio companies. So can you give us a little bit about your background to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks, Christy, for allowing me the opportunity to participate and be a part of the BIP team and making some impact to your portfolio companies. So thank you. Yes, Sales Talent Group has been around for 25 years. We've been in business. We exclusively focus in on what we call the go-to-market area of sales and marketing positions. So we've placed well over 1,000 sales professionals throughout those years. Small team, boutique shop, everybody works from home. We leverage technology. My entire team, they all come from a sales background. That all being said, it allows us to really understand the sales process and hiring of great salespeople, great sales leaders, and anybody that impacts that. So yeah, and I'm based here in Atlanta.
Great. Well, John, thank you so much for allowing us to pick your brain on some things. And speaking of sales hiring, oftentimes that first sales hire is super difficult, but mostly because of when the trigger is. So we have a lot of companies and it's founder-led sales. They're being pulled in a million different directions, and it's probably time to have that first sales hire take place. What are they looking for, and what do those companies what position is the company in at the time that sort of would indicate now's the time to pull that trigger?
Yeah, a super question. And yeah, that's a great kind of launching pad from where our conversations. But, they're obviously in early stage, as you said, they have a couple, 2 to 5 employees. There's the founder and maybe a product person or a marketing person. And it's sub-$1 million in revenue. And they have that trigger meeting. And the trigger meeting is where it's a board meeting or an internal meeting where they've been looking at and they realize there's some issues. So there's a bandwidth issue. The leaders are being stretched just way too thin. The demands on them for, doing presentations for raising capital or driving product or responsive to investors, et cetera, is distracting them to not make as many sales calls or be out on calls. Or they've just seen their revenue growth stall. They don't have any new things. They've exhausted their friends and family and the boards and founders networks. And so it's stalled and we don't have any, or they're just frankly ready for growth time. So that happens. And or just poor follow-up. They'll see leads and things that are hanging out there and nobody's following up on them because of those earlier comments. So they look at each other and say, what do we do now? And it says, okay, well, we got to hire a salesperson or a sales leader or something. We got to do something different than we've been doing in order to drive growth, because usually that's where it is. We've got to add some new opportunities, new customers, get outside of our little wheelhouse that we've been working in. And so what do we do? And so that's where the questions start happening. Our recommendation, where we'll see a lot of times a client will come to us and they don't know the answers to a lot of these questions I'm about to share with you. And it's like, they're clueless because they haven't captured it, and it can really cause some challenges down the road. So we've got to stop and pause for a moment and just ask some things like, how many customers do we have and how many are really referenceable? What are our call points? What are the transaction? Is it a complex sale, a transactional deal in sale? time to close, average deal size, all those sorts of things. And so from that, you're going to define out, right? What do we need? Because everybody's looking around the room and everybody's kind of got a different opinion as to where their seat is and what they need. So it's really important for everybody, board involved, investors involved, consultants involved, the founders involved, anybody that has some impact in this decision-making process to give some input as to what do we really need. But at some point, it usually boils back to, at the end of the day, we need to drive revenue.
Got it. Yeah, no doubt. So interesting that you say, like, what do we need? And we need to define that, because I think that there's sort of two schools of thought almost. Like, we need a sales leader to come in and sort of put all the pipes in place and, develop the system, or we need to just get some producers and we need to go get some account execs and support the founder. So where's your school of thought on that?
Yeah, definitely have great experience in that. In our years of doing this, we've seen hundreds of clients that have gone through this experience. We've seen them try and hire the sales manager purely, which if you can afford to do that and it's the right move, it's fine. You can do that. But 99% of the time, the reality is we need to sell something. And so over the next 12 months, 18 months, we need to generate another 10 customers, 5 customers doing $750,000 or $1.5 million in business. And at the end of the day, it's a doer. So we need to hire a salesperson and not all these other things. You can come up with some gap ideas, and BIP has some wonderful resources internally to help with that, or an external consultant maybe that the founding partner has a relationship with, they can play a role in that to help build what we like to call performance conditions, the CRM tool, any reports that need to be done, anything. Because at the end of the day, this person needs to be 100% focused on selling. And when you complicate their day with other things, it makes it more difficult. And they won't be selling. They'll be doing these other things that are non-revenue generating. They're process oriented or whatever. So get all that stuff out of the way as to who owns it, who's doing it, and hire this person to go be a seller and allow them to be, give them the greatest chance of being successful. Because that's what their job is. Let's go sell, and let's prove our concept. Let's prove our, if you don't have the metrics in place, if somebody hasn't done that, then this person's going to need to do that. So you're going to, on the front end, be able to share with them that experience as to what it is that we exactly need for you to do, which kind of leads us to the job design kind of discussion.
Yep, I was just gonna ask that. So you guys talk job design. Job description might be something other people are familiar with, but you've got to the point where you've made a decision. We're going to go try to find that producer. What's the first step in trying to do that?
Yeah, so the job design is kind of it. It's where it begins for us. And it's a fancy word for some things I'll share with you real quick. A job description says what you want the person to do in a job. And that's really good. We want that still. So it's not saying get rid of job descriptions. We want that. But a job design is really what boils down to what we want you to get done in the job. Nobody ever gets fired for the lack of doing. It's for what I didn't get done. So what we want to do is be able to have that done and completed and have everybody on the same page, investors, board, team, everyone, as to what those expectations are. And we walk through that process and what are the top, simply said, what are the top 5 to 7 things you want this person to accomplish? And usually it's quantified. So is it revenue growth from this to this? Is it a percentage increase of customers? How many customers? Is it a certain area you want to get into? Whatever. Define those things as to what does success look like. And so like for you and me, you got the whiteboard behind me here. It's like, okay, if we came back a year from now and we had wrote down these 5 to 7 things that we want this person to accomplish, what does it look like? And we walk back in that room and we say, that's what success looks like. That's what we want. So from that job design, then you can pull out what are the core competencies and behaviors, and more importantly, stories that you want this candidate to be able to tell you that says, I've done this. I've been there, done this before. It's not a 10-minute exercise. It could be a 2, 3, 4 hour battle between everyone to figure out what it is that we exactly want. And usually that'll flesh out saying, okay, we don't need a leader. We don't need this. We don't need that. We need someone from the market, not from the market, whatever. It'll flush those kinds of things out that lends to the whole challenge of how long it takes to hire this person. Because one of the biggest mistakes we see portfolio companies make at this stage is we'll get into 6-8 weeks into the search and they're all on different pages as to what it is. A board member meets with someone 6 weeks later after all this time and effort has been invested to say, no, I think that's the wrong thing. We need to do this. And it's like, okay, we got to hit a restart button. And that's not good for anybody.
So John, have you seen them actually, portfolio companies use their board in this process as well, like using them to help get this design done?
Absolutely. It's because the board, typically the board's on the board for a reason, right? And they've been there, done that many times. Most of the board members have some level of expertise, whether it's a product expertise or a market expertise, or been in a entrepreneurial environment expertise before, and that's what they bring to the table. And so leverage those strengths in helping to flush this out. Because a lot of times the founders don't. And that's another important thing of looking at a founder to say, okay, where did they come from? Have they ever done this before? Is this their first time in the rodeo, or have they been there, many times? And so most of the time it's their first time. And so they need to be really open to and flexible to what advice is coming from the boards or from other consultants, and take it all in to help make the best decision and choice for them going forward.
Yeah, great advice. So when you're thinking through the key qualifications for that first hire, what are some of the headlines of the qualifications that you see?
Yeah, one of the big headlines is the cultural part, right? So talking about an entrepreneurial spirit, because if there is only 3 or 4 members, the resources are lean and mean. And so someone who's got an entrepreneurial spirit, somebody who's adaptable and really resourceful, someone who's team oriented, because there's so much communication that has to happen in unknowns, that somebody who's not just a bull in a china shop running down, they've got to be able to communicate, an effective communicator, being able to share with the board or share with the leadership team what they're seeing, what they're not seeing. We also get into the passionate about the product. It's ideal if you got somebody who's got some passion, some experience in the marketplace of some sort. That's an ideal scenario. It doesn't always have to be, but it's ideal if you can. So they can deliver that message with some passion and conviction behind them. Doing a startup before is great, and it's a major plus. But if they don't have that, then you really need to drill down and ask a lot of questions around that. But ideally, they have come from some kind of background and done this before. But not every scenario allows you to have that. I think the risk-oriented aspect is important too, from the qualifications, that this person has demonstrated to be the ability to take on risk and understand it and work in that environment of chaos and madness and be okay with it. And that they're aligned with your vision and mission as to where you go. And then at the end of the day too, it's obviously to have somebody who's got a successful track record. They've demonstrated the ability. So when we go through and we talk about the job design, it's aligning the core competencies and behaviors of those things to those stories, and that they can tell us stories about that. And those core competencies can vary depending on the opportunity in the scenario. But at a high level, the things I just shared are kind of the main ones, just as a qualifications of a person. But then you certainly get into, they've been a top performer. They understand the product. They can demonstrate, if it's a specific technology of using PowerPoint or using Zoom or using whatever as a tool, that you flush those things out as well. I'm amazed at how many times we once had a client that it was crazy. They just assumed that this person could do PowerPoint in their presentations. This is a few years back. And they got into it, and the person could not deliver. They were a great salesperson, but couldn't do that. And they were spending too much time on it. So take that one and, whatever it may be, like tracking on a Salesforce product or any CRM tool. If that's important and we need to do that, then this person has to show that they've done it before. And that's not one of the issues that we're challenged with every day, is getting them to put information into our CRM or our SFA tool.
Yeah, but more support for why it's so important to do all the prep of what it is that you want them doing and that you need them to do, so that you don't forget to like those tactical things that are somewhat equally important.
Yeah. One of the last ones too, I'm sorry I didn't share this one, but attitude, aptitude, and desire are one of the things we look for too. And that's kind of universal, I think, in any great sales position, but it really is magnified when you're a un solo person, possibly on an island too, possibly, that you've got to be able to do this on your own. And so having a really strong attitude and positive attitude with a good aptitude about the product and competition and other things, whatever it may be. And then just a pure desire, right? Someone who wants to win and they're really fired up about that. That just makes such a big difference. So
Yeah, they're also a lot funner to work with.
yeah, they are. Absolutely.
So, John, how about compensation? So, many times I see early stage companies struggle with this because they get sticker shock sometimes, and so they're on a shoestring and they're trying not to spend anything, but sort of it's the quintessential. You have to spend money to make money. And then the secondary piece of it, it's really difficult when you have one person, like they're accustomed to having a territory or having a commission plan, and you're not exactly sure how to structure it because you don't know what someone outside the founder can do yet. So what have you seen people do on that?
Yeah, that's a great one. And a big issue or a big challenge and hurdle. I mean, it's a good thing when it goes one way, but it really is. It's for us when we're talking to a client as a search firm and we're going in and we're talking to the client and trying to get it. Many times what we wind up doing, and you can do this yourself or search firm can do it for you, whatever, but it's finding out the market conditions and the market realities first. So I've defined this job description of what I want, and I want to get an A player because everybody wants the top person, the best person. And so with that comes cost. The reality is that every individual that you talk to, more than likely, has got 5 to 10 years experience in selling for this type of person to go do this. Somebody who's been out there 5 years, 10 years selling is making a good dollar already, and they've got a good salary already, and they're not going to go back. So the sticker shock is a really good one. So don't be afraid to pay what you need to pay to get the right person. But then also be flexible, and the candidate also needs, so this is two-way street. The candidate needs to be that way too. So that's something you're looking for, but the company needs to be flexible as to acknowledging the realities of what may happen. If all of a sudden there's a windfall and, we closed these 3 big clients that we never thought, and all of a sudden the salesperson, because the comp plan we built, says you're going to get paid $1 million, it's like, that shouldn't happen. So you need to be smart about your approach. And yeah, there might need to be some caps in there or some limits in some way. But base bonus on performance with some MBOs that are aligned in there, whether it's pipeline calls that I'm doing, pipeline build, how many presentations I've made, some of the basic fundamentals of selling and building that. But your job design at the beginning should capture that. So if we know there's a certain amount of revenue that we need or number of customers we need, you've captured all of that. And you can plug in an MBO or pay a person based on some of those things, especially at the early stages, until you determine some of the true metrics that are out there. Because the most difficult job and most difficult hire for salespeople that we do is this one we're talking about right here. By bar none, most difficult hire out there, and finding somebody who can do all that. So, So the second piece of that, Christy, I would say is the constant communication. So the early stages, you need to tell them that saying, hey, our compensation plan could be adjusted up or down, to your side, to your benefit, our benefit. What we're trying to be is fair and reasonable and market comparable as to what they've been making. Because who's going to leave a job where I've been the top performer to come somewhere where I don't know the hiring team, I don't know the product, I don't know this. So that's a high risk thing. So the pool for those types of people gets pretty small. I'd throw this caveat in that a lot of times for this hire the best hire, and that's why the senior team should always look internally first to their network. Because if I have somebody, and if you can't do that, you need a search firm to help you go do that, that's okay too. But just know that person typically, because trust has been built, and that's a big part of this formula, saying, okay, I trust the founder is going to do the right thing when something goes wrong, either, one way or the other way. And then vice versa, the leader trusts that person that they'll understand the scenario. And so it just really opens up the communication and allows people to be on the same page a little better. So, but constant communication, one of the things we see is somebody will hire somebody and they'll put them out on the island and off they go, and they expect everything to happen in a tunnel. And it's like, wait a second, I need to meet with you once a week at a minimum to talk about pipeline, so setting up consistent cadence of communication and reviewing the expectations every week, week in, week out. That needs to happen for the first 6 months at a minimum. And then beyond that, it can tail off because now we've hopefully proven out some concepts and some of the metrics and so forth. But it's got to happen early on.
Yeah. And as you're suggesting, I think that not only is the communication important under any circumstances, but certainly when you have a lot of moving parts and things that are unknown. And the other thing I think is that people who are attracted to take that risk, they want that because they're part of building something, and like that information loop of like, hey, I'm learning these things and it's coming back, and then you guys are actually implementing changes because of it. I mean, I think that that's also an attractive quality to the job. So if you're, if you don't keep that communication loop super tight, I think you also run the risk that it's not, an opportunity, we'll say, of making that job more attractive to those types of individuals who seem to thrive in this earlier stage.
Yeah. And again, that's a great, when you flesh out, if that's what the culture, the scenario is going to be, when you're doing the job design, you're capturing some of that. So I want some stories from someone that tells me that they've done this before and they're comfortable with it and they're okay operating. Yeah. And they thrive in that environment. Yeah. Because many times you'll get somebody from a big company that sold great products and did all this and looks good on the resume and all that, or somebody who's maybe farther down the line in their career path and they just don't want to do that stuff anymore. Yeah. You need to flesh it out and be realistic to that person in the interview process. Say, this is what our expectations are. We got to have this. And so again, that process early on of having a job design, job description conversation and having that flushed out makes a big difference.
Yeah, I can see. So maybe part of being realistic also is job titling. So have you seen mistakes there? Because I've seen it before where we think we can, instead of comping them, we're going to actually try to lure them over with a title that is basically well beyond their capabilities. And that doesn't ever work well.
It doesn't. I think, again, if we go back to, usually we see that problem happening when it's the team thinks that they can hire a sales manager leader who is also going to sell for us. That's usually where that becomes a problem. If we know, we do the job design and this is what you're going to do, this is what 18 months, this is what you got to go do, then put in a title that's appropriate for that person. And that doesn't mean it couldn't be a VP or director of sales or something like that. I mean, but the best title, if you're hiring someone, is an accountant, enterprise account executive, if it's appropriate, or a sales account executive, if it's appropriate. I think, you can use it a little bit, but don't go a lot of it like that's going to win them over. I mean, I think the other one too, we did talk about that, is equity in the company. Equity is another one that is earned and can be used to help offset that. And they've got skin in the game. But again, those are discussions that need to be happening. Everybody's on the same page. And how does it translate? We can't, a lot of times the founders will say, well, I'll give them a lot of equity, and that's why they should take a base salary that's a third of what the market is or what they have today. The reality is you don't want to, a person who is probably in their early 30s to late 30s, early 40s, typically for a job like this, is got a family, has got kids going to school, has got a house, has got all these sorts of things. And that's not cheap these days. And so
not realistic.
And so you gotta be thinking about those sorts of things. And your situation may be different, where you were funded, or maybe you had an event and you made some money, or I don't know, whatever. But the point being is that your probability of finding that purple squirrel, we like to call that person, is really small. And so if speed is of the essence, finding the purple squirrel is super hard. And, we just can't pull that squirrel out of a hat all the time. So it's, So again, having these discussions and debates and relying on your board to help you with it, relying on some, advice from you and your team at BIP to, you've been there, you've seen it. And so you've got stories to share and tell. So founder really needs to be hearing that and understand that and be okay with it, because the market is what the market is in order to get that person. I've seen a lot of people, a lot of founders walk away and being from a compensation package instead of being creative and flexible on how to do that to get that person in the boat and get them on board. Just walk away, walk away from some really good talent. And again,
right. Over $10,000.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've seen it. The other thing, you've mentioned it sort of in some of your answers, is this idea of a coach player. I'm sure you get that all the time, like, hey, we want you to hire a coach player. What I heard you say earlier is that doesn't really work, because if their number one job is to sell, everything else is a distraction. So on this first hire, this idea of a coach player, not really work.
Yeah. Again, Christy, and I can count on my hand how many times it's worked. And I know it's a great idea and it sounds good. And it's, boy, then we don't have the transition, but it just doesn't work. And I've talked to other partners that we work with, and it just rarely works. The time when it does work is when it's a founder's relationship, a network that I've worked with them before, or a board member who really knows the person and has worked with. There's experience and there's trust built. That in those instances, it may work. But the end of the day is whether there's the person's capable of doing these calls in order to go sell. And sometimes those calls is doing 30, 40 calls a day in some instances in order to get the traction to go sell something. And is this sales leader who's been a CRO, when's the last time they did it? And are they really interested? So it's important to understand those job expectations of what do they need to do on a day-to-day basis. And so again, answer is, hire someone for the job at hand, and you can
always promote them.
Yeah, you can always promote them down the line. Don't overpromise and that they're going to move into something. I think it's job number one is sell and close business, and let's prove it out. We can talk about it later, but don't guarantee anybody anything and promise them the sky on that. I think where I was heading with is that you can find other resources, like within by VIP team, you have resources. There's external consultants you can hire. They can help shore up some of these things that need to happen with that salesperson, and whether it's process things that need to get put in place, building out
the demo. Yeah.
And again, that's that communication part of understanding the resources that are available to them, and who do I go to? Who's the person that can help me on a demo? Who's the person that can help, or do I got to do all that? And if so, so it's enlightening to have those discussions, because it flushes out what you really need early on.
Yeah, makes sense. And John, you've even told me at times, like, we'll come, and if it's like super early, they have very little revenue, you're just like, they need to find somebody in their network. Have you ever seen it work where they look to someone homegrown? And what I mean by that is that they have somebody who's not necessarily come from sales, but might be in the company as a customer success person, or they might be like one of the engineers who's more outgoing. Or have you ever seen them repurpose somebody who then actually flourishes in that first role because they understand the product?
Yeah. The answer is yes. Have I seen it? Again, very small percentage on your hands. It's a big risk to take when if your ask is to go deliver this number and they've never done the job before. There's a lot of unknowns. Boy, there really is. If it maybe that individual might be good, because again, if the ask is new logo, the hardest part is getting in the door of a place, and if the person's never done it, they're just going to fail. Now, if you got leads machines are coming in and you got tons of leads and referrals, and this person is a subject matter expert, is good at it, okay, that may work, right? But if your true ask is to go do new logo, new business development, no.
You need someone trained in sales.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, John, maybe in closing, what are clearly the not defining the job correctly and not having everybody on the same page, not having the comp alignment. over titling. Those are things and mistakes that you've seen. Anything else that that anybody who's listening who's thinking like, okay, I'm getting ready for this first hire, mistakes that you've seen made that you don't want them to have to repeat?
Yeah, those are certainly the two B's that happen. Don't fall in love too early. Um, be open to talking to 3, 4, 5, 6 people and having some conversations. I think that's one, because a lot of times there's such a high urgency to hire the person that they rush the process. So, and I'd say that's the other big one, is not having a well-defined interview process up front. So in that process of job design, in that same stage before that, is to flush out what does our recruiting, hiring, selection process look like, and put everybody through it. Even if it's the guy and gal that you think you've known, put them through that process. Because again, you're going to flush things out for them, and you're going to flush things out for yourself, because you want the experience to be good for the candidate too, and that they feel like they've been able to fully vet the scenario and understand it. And, somebody else, you might be all googly-eyed about the person, and someone else looks at them and says, hey, hang on, they don't know how to use PowerPoint.
Right.
Right?
Actually, that just made me think of something else. They always say, be slow to hire and quick to fire.
Yeah.
Salespeople, that's a sticky wicket sometimes, because, you tend to give them a lot of leeway because there's onboarding, and then they have this whole period of time where there's this, the sales cycle. So do you have sort of advice that you give to founders, and they're calling you and saying this person isn't working out, or, what do you use as guidelines for when it's time to pull the plug?
Yeah. Yeah. The big one is, again, it goes back to that whole first step of getting a good job design in place or key accountabilities in place. And it's been effectively communicated up front. That's what we see happen more than anything else, is that doesn't happen. And then the candidate will call the candidate and say, hey, what happened? And they're like, I don't know. I got blindsided. And it's like, okay. And, and it was something really, I don't want to say easy, but something we could have had cleared up on the front end or caught early on to salvage the deal. But if the founders have not done that job of truly going outside their network and making the calls and doing the calls with this person, if that's what the task at hand is that we're doing, is getting involved in that. And so they understand it, and they see the pains, and they see the challenges, and that constant communication on a weekly basis to say, what are the hurdles that you're running into, versus just pulling a trigger on the person. They're not working out. Well, what does that mean? Right. I'm not getting appointments. We had a client who called us recently and said, hey, the person's making a boatload of calls, but they're not getting any appointments. It's like, okay, well, my ask is, well, how did you do those some calls? Did you do 10 calls and see what happens? Because maybe there's another messaging issue, or maybe it's a wrong market, or maybe it's something else. And you need to flush through it. So don't be too quick to fire, but the constant communication and understanding what the job at hand and what the task is, and getting involved in that. Don't be afraid of making some calls or being on the call with that person. So, yeah. So I would say that.
Well, that makes all kinds of sense. And also setting, activity expectations. And so that is an early indicator. If they're not making the number of calls, or they're not sort of hitting those and exceeding those, then that's a pretty early indicator that they might not be the right fit.
Absolutely. I mean, fundamental things, right? Of just picking up the phone, making phone calls, and putting activities into your CRM or SFA tool, and tracking that sort of thing. There's a missing motivation. So that's something we missed in the interview process, and should never happen.
Right.
Because again, we're asking for great stories. If we set up the stories of what our expectation is, they should be able to tell you those things. And, make sure you do what we call testimonial checks. I say that's another one, Christy, that we see. People will say reference checks, right? References is, did they work at a company, and how long were they there, and blah, blah, blah. Are they eligible for rehire? A testimonial, which is more difficult, is asking that candidate. It's from the great book called Top Grading, is called Torquing a Candidate, Threat of Reference Check. So it's saying, hey, I'd love for you to set up a call for me to go talk to your prior client, client boss, and ask them, how they were back then in this scenario and what did they do, and try and flush those things out. It's amazing. You'll find out if some of the stories are true that they're telling you or not, right? And it's really important to inspect what you expect in those instances. And so do those things. And it can't get past the hiring manager. A CEO, a founder, whoever it may be, needs to know that you need to do this. That's not something, don't pass it off to a recruiter. Don't pass it off to HR. Don't pass it off to a friend. You need to do it because you need to understand this person that you're hiring and what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. How can I help them? And if there's going to be an issue or not. Because so you could ask someone, hey, did they make cold calls, pick up the phone? How did they do? And answer their questions. And now you know, because salespeople can mask things
can sell themselves.
Yeah, they can sell themselves in a 60-minute, conversation to anybody. So getting that person though to really validate and verify information is important. And so take it to that next. Don't just take it for face value to move on. So it might take an extra step or two. You need to do it.
I'd actually read something recently and I thought it was a good idea. It said like the 2 interview questions to ask at the end were, who would give you a rave review and a, raving reference and why, and then ask the reverse and, and who's going to give you the worst and why. And I guess that's not the same as talking to the same people, but it certainly is an indication of potentially some skeletons in the closet.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to too, it takes a longer time. I view this as what we call $1 million deal, right? So it's $1 million deal for the candidate. The candidate's going to work for you for 3 to 5 years, you're hoping. And they're making $200,000 to $300,000 a year. So it's worth $1 million to that candidate in personal income. To the company, from a profit perspective, you're expected this person is selling up to generate $1 million+ in profit for you during that time period. So that being said, treat this like it's $1 million deal. It's as if I went to, if I was a sales manager and I was talking to this, and I, you were my sales manager, and I found a deal that was out there for $1 million. What would we do? We put together a Miller Hyman stuff, a blue sheet, or some kind of a big process of mapping out decision makers, influencers, who's the competition, what's the budget, what's the et cetera. And you'd spend hours doing that before you ever went and did a presentation. Well, the same is true for this role. So treat it like it's $1 million deal. You're going to spend 30, 40 hours of time, over a 3-4 week period of time to hire this person. So treat it that way.
Yeah, that's a great framework to use because both of those things are absolutely true.
Yeah. A real resonating one is, what did you do to go raise money? Right? They had a big slide deck. Well, it's the same idea, same principle for entrepreneurs. So yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, no, and it's also going to set sort of the tenor for your entire sales organization, and they're either going to really help elevate or they pull in the opposite direction. It's critical hire.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so all this has been really great. So appreciate it. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, the biggest question would be what are you seeing that the portfolio companies struggle with as it relates to hiring?
Yeah, so many of the things that you've already talked about, I think the only thing that we haven't touched on is that they get really starry-eyed with candidates that have worked for large companies, big logos, and they think that those skills are going to translate. So somebody has worked for Microsoft or worked for Facebook, or and so they feel that gives them this not only cachet, but this person's going to walk into this role and they're going to be able to duplicate that success. And the fact of the matter is, it just doesn't translate. It doesn't translate on so many levels. There's a certain amount of grit and fortitude that working for a really large company doesn't necessarily afford you. The reality of having very limited budget, they're not having to deal with that. And there's also you are responsible for this entire process in many instances, and building an entire part of an organization. Even if you've been high up and been, a strategic leader within a large organization, you may have a lot of responsibility, but you're not responsible for every single aspect of something. So I've seen it also be completely overwhelming. I've also seen it where they think that they're above it. Like hey, I'm here to manage and I'm not here to do. And so specifically with the first hire, that is obviously a formula for disaster. But even on the leadership roles, that if you take somebody who does not really understand what they're signing up for, and they just like the allure or maybe even the folklore of working for a startup or an early stage company, it almost always ends not well. So
Yeah.
You lose a lot of traction. If you make the mistake, especially on leadership roles, of getting the wrong person in, that could be a year setback, because you have all the time you spend getting them up to speed, all the traction you lose with losing them and then having to start again. It's very, very costly mistake. So, oftentimes just like trying to help them rationalize why it's not a good hire. And I think using that process with that job design, as you're suggesting, really kind of would help that, because it would help them be able to articulate what the expectations were to the candidate, but also, help them get very clear minded, and not be sort of dazzled by the resume, because they don't necessarily always correlate.
Yeah, they don't at all. In the 25 years of doing this, I can tell you right now that it rarely does that work. It's especially in this, again, the most difficult sales hire is this first hire in any company. And the most difficult sales job is this sales job in a small company. So
Yeah, they have very little support. They have very little infrastructure. They're having to fly the plane while they're, building it. And it takes a very special and unique individual for sure.
it very much does. And so, yeah, so absolutely going back to some of those core personalities, not just, being strong desire, hard worker, work ethic, independent, resourcefulness, all those things that are, you can say those are the same for some at big companies, because I worked at a big company for years myself, and I made it, but boy, it's painful. And a lot of times a startup company doesn't have that time and runway in order to allow that to happen. So, that's where I get back to that whole, we talk about the internal performance conditions, that if you take performance conditions and you say, okay, this is what we would like to have, these things of tools and sales methodology and, et cetera, and you align it to what a large, big company has and what we have, it's night and day. And it's like saying, okay, well, here's the continuum of where we want to get to. But right now we're over here. We've got nothing.
Right.
And
Well, that's the thing with a large company. You have all kinds of resources and a lot of things have been figured out. So it's a lot easier, potentially, to be successful, because a lot of the things have been already figured out. This person has to be learning and like iterating at all times, and that not everybody feels comfortable doing that.
yeah, and you got to be careful when you have a person who is unemployed or is leaving that big company. Again, that salesperson can sell you on why they are going to be a good fit. And I've done all these things, and those are all really nice things. But honestly, it's hard to do. And if you have not done it before, there's going to be trouble more than likely. And
Yeah, you don't know what you're signing up for.
yeah. And you want to be fair to everybody, right? And for them too, saying, hey, I appreciate that, but understand this is our market reality for us, and we need someone who can do these things. And so having those hard dialogue and that early on is good. And I think that's also why talk to more than one person, and don't get starry-eyed and googly-eyed with that first person that we get referred in. Talk to 3 or 4 or 5 people before you make a decision. And, if you're going to lose someone, okay, fine, we're going to lose that person. But, get through and talk to a few other people, get everybody on the same page, and you'll be setting yourself up for success more often by doing that than just, pulling the trigger on this great person we just got referred.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, control the things we can control, because so much of it is out of our control. So, and then also making sure that they are making the right decision. It's the right fit for them, because if they deselect, it's the same pain, whether, we're doing it or they're doing it. And they certainly have choices on where they work. So you want to do
Absolutely.
this. John, thank you so much for all the time and all the advice and wisdom. And thank you again for all your support for BIP. And look forward to continued partnership.
Awesome. I appreciate it very much, Christy. You guys make it a great day. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. You too, John. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the BIP Ventures Extraordinary Pursuits podcast. Check the show notes on our blog for the resources we discussed. You can find Extraordinary Pursuits on your favorite audio platform. Be sure to subscribe to the BIP Ventures YouTube channel and connect with us on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram so you get all the stories, learnings, and ideas for ways to thrive in the innovation economy. And if you liked this episode, be generous. Share it.